Hi everyone. I'm here today to talk about pressure canners, but first I want to acknowledge that a lot of you are asking me for how-to videos on canning. And I really want to do that, but right now I'm not set up in a way that I can. I can't really use a tripod, and I can't really one-hand it because canning requires both my hands. And right now, at least, I don't have anybody to film me. So, in the meantime, you can either go to my blog, I'll put the link down here, and there are step-by-step how-to articles with photographs showing how to water bath can and how to pressure can. Or you can go to the National Center for Home Food Preservation website. That will show you a safe way to learn how to can, either pressure can or water bath. Or you can purchase a newer Ball canning book. That would either be the Ball book, Blue Book of Preserving, which you can get anywhere. Usually there are canning supplies, or of course on Amazon or someplace like that. Or my personal favorite, which is the Ball Complete Book of Home Preservation. I think that's the right wording. I will put links to that in the description for you. But in the meantime, let's just talk about pressure canners. So first of all, you must pressure can low acid food for safety reasons. I have talked about in videos before and certainly on my blog why it's not a good idea to water bath can low acid foods. Low acid foods are meats and fish, if you don't include that as meat, and also vegetables that are not pickled. You know, there's a lot of people online who do water bath those things, and they do it for long periods of time, which to my way of thinking is a waste of electricity or gas and a waste of your time, plus it's leaching nutrients from the food. And the thing is, every few years, sometimes every year, I think, as it becomes increasingly popular, we're seeing people who are getting food poisoning and even botulism from those things. So please don't do that. It just isn't worth the risk. Pressure canners, I know a lot of people are scared of them, but the modern ones and the two I'm going to talk to you about today, they're really safe and they're really easy to learn how to do. And you know for sure your food is safe. So, there are two brands of pressure canners that are high quality and super safe and preferred among canners. And they are Presto, which is what you see here, and All American, which is back here. Either one of these is going to do a great job for you. It really is. But there are pros and cons to them, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So here is my Presto. It's a 23-quart Presto, and you know, forgive its appearance. I've had it for probably 14 years, and we have hard water, and it's seen a lot of use, so it's not all shiny and pretty. But now I'm going to grab the camera so you can get some up-close shots at what this looks like and what the pros and cons of it are. Okay, so here you can see my Presto 23-quart canner. This is, it will hold about 7 quarts and 16 pint jars if you double stack them. So that would mean you put a layer down here and then another layer on top. Now bear in mind that that is if you use narrow mouth jars. If you put all wide mouth jars in there or even some wide mouth jars in there, it's not going to hold quite as much. This is made out of aluminum. It will not warp. You don't have to worry about that. And you can see it actually comes with what's called a dial gauge. And this dial gauge shows you what the pressure inside the canner is. Right now, of course, it's at 0 because it's empty and I don't have the heat turned on the stove. But as you're canning, in most locations, you want it to about 10 pounds pressure. That varies according to your elevation, so bear that in mind and make sure you understand those rules. This pressure canner only comes with a dial gauge. This is called a rocker gauge, and when you're canning, it goes like this, okay? And it regulates the pressure inside the canner. This I had to buy separately. It wasn't very expensive. It's like $12 or something like that. It comes off and it has weights on it. Mine is set up for 10 pounds pressure. You can also set it up for 15 depending on your elevation. Now, the reason I bought this is that with a dial gauge, you must have it checked for accuracy every single year. You can do that through your county extension office. Oftentimes they'll do it through a hardware store or someplace that sells canning supplies locally. But I like the idea of not having to run into town and do that and not being reliant upon them offering that service. So I bought the rocker gauge and now I can use this as a guide, but this is much more accurate. So as I'm canning, I know that if it's rocking gently the entire time, I have the correct pressure. It's super, super simple. Okay, now you'll also see that here there's a valve and there's also a valve over here. These are safety valves. The reason there are multiple ones is if for any reason one of them stops working, it gets plugged up, there's a backup. And that's what makes modern pressure canners so much safer than like what your grandma used. You should always, as a general rule, check. You can lift up this lid and look through this hole, hold it up to the light, make sure that it's not plugged up for some strange reason. I have never had mine get plugged up in all the 15 years or 14 years I've had this, but it's just smart to do. Okay, now look at the handles here. You'll see if I can get a better view. These are plastic, okay? And they kind of, this one in particular, it screws in place. And I have had those come loose. It's not, I mean, not fall off, but just get jiggly. And it's no big deal to just tighten those up. But it is a separate piece. Now, when you lock this lid in place, you're going to line up. See, there's an arrow here. And I'm not very tall, but there's an arrow right there. And you line them up, and then you, see if I can do it with one hand. There, now it's locked, okay? And that's how you use this when you're using it as a pressure canner. And it's easier to do than what I show. I'm just a weakling and I only have one hand. Okay, now let me take this lid off and I want you to see the big, big difference between this and a All American. So you can see there is this black gasket here. See, it pulls out. All right, it's like a rubber, I think. If you are familiar with using an Instant Pot, I know they're super popular right now. It also has a gasket, so that's the same idea here. And you can, it just pops in. And when it's under pressure, this is what makes it possible for the canner to get under pressure. It seals the lid on. So it's a simple system, but the downfall to it is that this isn't a lifetime thing. It wears out. So some people online have said, oh, I have to change it every year. I've never, ever had to change mine every year. I think I've changed mine once in all the years I've had mine. But it requires, to keep it supple and good, you're going to wipe it down with a little olive oil. And I do that once, maybe twice a year. Not a big deal. And I always keep an extra on hand. They're not expensive. I think they're like $10 maybe. Not really sure, but probably not more than that. And I just keep one on hand because if I'm in the middle of canning and my gasket fails, because it is just a sudden failure kind of thing, then I want to have that on hand. Otherwise, I have food in jars and what do I do with it? You know, put it in the fridge. That's not really what I'm after. Okay, now let's look inside. So all these marks you see on here, this is just from use and it's very normal. There is a rack. The Presto comes with one rack. Let's see if I can lift it out here. There we go. It is also just aluminum. And the whole point of this is simply to keep the jars from touching the bottom. If your jars are touching the bottom of the pot, they're likely to crack. Now, when you double stack, you would put pint jars on here, and then you grab another rack, which with the Presto you have to buy. Again, not expensive. I think $10, $12, something like that. You would put it on top of your first stack of jars, and then you can put another row of jars on top here. One thing about this is, I don't know if you can see, because sometimes even I have a little trouble finding it, but there are, yeah, there you can see 1 line and 2 lines. These are the watermark lines. So if you're only doing 1 stack of jars, no matter the size, you fill your water up to here. I don't know if you can kind of get an idea how high that is. I would say it's maybe 4-5 inches up the side of the canner. And if you're doing 2 stacks, this is the water line. That is different than the All American, which I'll talk about in a moment. So I think that basically gives you a good idea of how the Presto works. So now let me set this aside and grab the All American. Okay, here's the All American. This is, I haven't had this very long, so that may account for some of the shiny prettiness, but also it has like a shiny, or maybe you might call it a mirror finish, whereas the Presto is kind of brushed. So if that matters to you. So, you know, kind of, I think the All American looks scarier somehow. Maybe it's all these warning labels. But, and also these, they look so, I don't know, antiquated. But trust me, they're both very safe. So the All American, it has a plastic handle up here, which I have to confess I absolutely love. With the Presto, I can't tell you how many times I've picked up when I'm done canning, picked up the lid from these handles and had steam come into my face. Now, I've never burned myself or anything like that, but it's not very pleasant. But with the All American, I can lift this up and it shields my arm and my face from steam. So I really like that feature. Okay, now again, we have a gauge here, a dial gauge. All American doesn't want you to only use this gauge. This canner comes with a rocker gauge. I think they call it something different. I think they call it a pressure release valve or something like that. And so you don't have to buy this separately, which is really nice. But you'll see it's very different from the Presto version. So each of these holes, this one I think is 10. It's marked on here. Let's see if I can see. Oh, it's hard to tell through the camera, but I think that's 10, which again is where I set my pressure canner. And it sits here, and instead of like rocking back and forth, which you can't even really do with this, it kind of turns. But what makes this, and it doesn't do it continually. The instructions say that you want it to turn once to 4 times every minute. So I'm having I've been using the Presto for, like I've said already, many years, and this is very different, and I don't love that I have to sit there and like count and make sure that the pressure is right. So because if you get the pressure too high and this is spinning too often, what happens is the contents of your jars can overflow the jars, which then leaves residue on the rims of your jars, which can lead to the lids not sealing. So we don't want that. And of course, if it's not moving often enough, then the pressure isn't correct inside the canner and it becomes a safety issue. Your food hasn't been heated enough to kill the pathogens that can make you sick. So, you know, I'm getting used to this. It's just different and to me, not as convenient. Okay, what else? Something that is very different is the way the All American seals. So you can see up here, there's an arrow, and down here, there's a line, a groove. And what you do, let's see if I can, it's tricky for me to do this with one hand, but you kind of set your arrow a little, not quite in line with this, and then you turn, and there, I can do it with one hand, haha. Okay, so now the lid is in the proper place, and I can't show you the right way to do it because I'm one-handing, but you would take this one and then the one opposite over here, and you lift them up and kind of get them in this little groove, and then you turn them to tighten them. And you want to do 2 at a time every time you do it. And the reason for that is we want the lid to be, you don't want gaps in the lid. Like on the other side, you don't want the little gap here to be higher than the one on this side. And then once you've done 2, then you can go around and do 2 more and then 2 more and you're done. Okay, and that, my friends, is what seals this lid in place. And this is why I bought an All American as my second pressure canner. So you can see there is no gasket anywhere, okay? This is a metal on metal system that works because of these weird looking bolts. So this is nice because you don't have to worry about ever replacing a gasket. So it's just more self-sufficient, more convenient. You do want to, I think the manual says every time you use this to put a little olive oil on your finger and run it over here. And the reason for that is sometimes just the metal gets kind of sticky and it makes the lid harder to get off. So I've been doing it every time. I've heard other people say they don't quite do it every time, you know. But if you wash your canner after every use, which you should, because otherwise you can end up with pitting potentially if food or something gets on the metal, then you're going to want to reapply that and, you know, just give it a little grease, basically, is what you're doing, except you want to use olive oil or petroleum jelly is the other thing they recommend. They can't recommend necessarily other oils because they can get gummy and so on. By the way, this All American is also made out of aluminum, but it is a much heavier grade. The whole canner is much heavier. I'll get back to that in a moment, but I just wanted to point out that this also has release valves to prevent the canner from exploding. These are just safety measures, just in case. You know, you really should never have a pressure canner explode as long as you check the vent hole every time you use it, but this is just added security. So, going back over here, this thing is heavy, and it's something, oh, by the way, this is just from use again. It happens the first time you use it. It may be worse because we have hard water, I don't know. But it's totally normal. The All American is considerably heavier than the Presto. And some people, you know, say, oh, I don't want to have to lift that. Well, the trick is you put the thing on your stove and then you put your jars in and then you add the water. That way you're not lifting it. And you should never be lifting any pressure canner when it has jars in it anyway. It's just not a good idea, especially if it's hot. When you need to get water out, I just ladle it out. You can pour the last little bits out. This thing, I mean, there are people who pass this down the generations. I mean, it will last your lifetime, certainly, and probably beyond that, which is another good reason to buy an All American. One thing that I also appreciate, if I get down here, if I can grab it, here we go. It comes with 2 racks. So they know you're going to probably double stack. So they have the one for the bottom. And then if you put your pint jars in here, they just provide the other rack that you put on top, and then you can put another layer of jars on top of that. That's nice. And another thing I kind of like is that this requires less water. You're only supposed to put 2 to 3 inches of water in the bottom of it. So that's nice. It's, you know, why not use less water if you can? Okay, so a lot of people have said to me, oh, tell me which one performs better. So I was curious about this too. I thought that because the All American was so much heavier and that it would certainly take longer to heat and therefore longer to process the food. But I noticed that the Presto requires more water. And it turned out, I timed this a few times, that they really were almost identical when it came to, by the time you finished the whole process and timed it out, it took just as long, or just as short, however you look at it, to can, say, beans, in this canner, the All American, as it did in the Presto. So even though, for example, it seemed like the All American came to pressure faster than the Presto, in the long run, it didn't really make any difference. By the time, it came to pressure and you ran your food through the required amount of time and you released the pressure and finally you pulled the jars out. I was surprised. So as far as performance, it's, really a toss-up. The big difference is price. Let's just face it, it's price. So the Presto is an excellent beginner model. Not that you can't use it forever, even if you're an expert canner. But it's appealing because it's more affordable. So right now on Amazon, this sells for about $77. And usually, it depends on where you live, but like in our area, we see these in lots of stores, and sometimes they go on sale. Not for a huge amount, but you might get one for $70 or maybe $65. So if you don't want to invest a bunch of money up front and you just want to test out pressure canning, or maybe your budget just doesn't allow you to easily pay for something more expensive, you really are not going to go wrong with a Presto. It's a great machine. Hot canner. I have used it for many years, and I've never had a real problem with it. I think I did have to replace one of the seals beyond the gasket once. And just take good care of it. Wash it out when you're done, oil it, make sure that the vents are clear, and you're good. The All American has a scary price tag. I'm a frugal person, and when I saw that this 25-quart All American was selling for almost $300, I think I bought it for $299.95 or something. Oh my goodness, that seems like an awful lot for a canner. Okay, I get it. Matter of fact, I spent a lot of time looking for a used one on Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist, and I could see them in areas that were hours away, but nobody had one locally that they wanted to sell. With either type of canner, it's okay to buy used. You want to make sure that all parts are there and that the dial gauge has been tuned up, if you will, and it's a good idea just to take it to your county extension office and have them check it out for safety features and all of that. If you've been canning for a very long time, maybe you want to do that on your own, but generally I would just recommend to have the experts look at it. So, this was an investment. I saved my pennies, and but the reason I did is self-sufficiency. So, right, I know it's going to last a long time. I don't have to worry about the dial gauge going bad because it is reliant upon this rocker gauge. I know I don't have to replace any gaskets. There's really, no seals to break. If something happened, it would be like an egregious thing, like if I threw it down the stairs or something. This thing is going to last. This one is just a little bit more delicate. You are going to have to eventually replace some gaskets, maybe some seals. If you don't, go ahead and buy that extra rocker gauge, which, by the way, usually the best place to get that is the Presto website. That way you're getting exactly the right thing and that it's not made by some other company and then therefore might not work correctly. But it's all about your priorities. So is it more important for you to save some money and maybe buy a few extra parts? Or is it more important for you to buy once, cry once, and know that you're really not going to have to invest any more money in this? I don't know. It's up to you. Again, both of them are great. It's just a matter of what your preferences are, what your priorities are, and what your budget is. I hope this helps. If you like it, please hit the little like button, maybe share it, make a comment. Anything like that really helps. Thanks a lot. Bye.